The auction block smelled of sweat and shame. Gideon Cole stood at the back of the barn, hat pulled low, dust clinging to his boots. He'd ridden 12 miles that morning not knowing what he'd find. Now he wished he'd stayed home. The auctioneer's voice echoed off the rafters, sharp, practiced, cold. Next item, female, age 22 near about, no family, no papers, no complaints filed. Been through 3 houses already. Returns ain't accepted, but at this price, you ain't risking much. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Gideon didn't laugh. A young woman was led onto the platform. Her wrists were bound in front of her with frayed rope, her ankles connected by a short chain that forced her to shuffle. She wore a dress that might have been white once. Now it was the color of road dust and dried tears. Her dark hair hung loose and tangled around her face, and she kept her eyes down, fixed on the warped floorboards beneath her bare feet. She didn't struggle, didn't speak, didn't look up. But her shoulders trembled. "Don't look there," she whispered. It wasn't loud. Gideon barely heard it over the murmur of men sizing her up like a plow horse, but he heard it, and something in his chest tightened like a fist. The auctioneer grinned, tobacco-stained teeth flashing. "She's quiet, boys, real quiet, don't eat much. Good with mending if you got the patience to teach her. Start the bid at $20. "Silence." Gideon scanned the crowd. 30 men, maybe more. Ranch hands, drifters, a few he recognized from town. None of them moved. 20, the auctioneer tried again. "Come on now, she's young, she's healthy, ain't gonna find cheaper." Still nothing. The woman's breathing quickened. Her bound hands twisted together, knuckles white. 15, the auctioneer said, voice tightening. $15 and she's yours. No questions, no paperwork, clean sale. A man near the front spat into the dirt. She got a mouth on her. "Quiet as church mice," the auctioneer said quickly. "Last one I bought talked back, had to return her." More laughter. The woman flinched but didn't lift her head. Gideon's jaw clenched. His horse waited outside, saddled and ready. He could leave, should leave. This wasn't his fight, wasn't his business. But her voice stayed in his head. "Don't look there." Not a cry for help, a plea for mercy, for dignity. The auctioneer's smile faded. $10, final offer before she goes back to the wagon. "What happens then?" someone called out. The auctioneer shrugged. "Ain't my concern. She'll ride with the others headed south, probably end up in a work camp or worse. Either way, she's off my hands." The woman's head came up just slightly, not enough to meet anyone's eyes, but enough for Gideon to see her face. She was young, younger than he'd thought. Her cheekbone carried a faded bruise, yellowish green now, and there was a thin scar running from her temple to her jaw. Old wound, poorly healed. And in that moment, Gideon saw something that made his blood go cold. He knew that scar. The barn seemed to tilt. His heartbeat roared in his ears. 8 years ago, a farmhouse 20 miles west of here, smoke rising into a summer sky, a girl no older than 14 clutching a blanket, blood streaking her face from a gash above her eye. He'd been riding dispatch for the Union Army, carrying messages between camps. He'd stopped to water his horse and found her sitting in the dirt, staring at the ashes of what used to be her home. He'd wrapped the wound himself, torn a strip from his own shirt and tied it tight while she sat there, silent and shaking. "What's your name?" he'd asked. She hadn't answered, just stared at the ruins. He'd wanted to stay, wanted to do more, but orders were orders and the war didn't wait. So he'd ridden off, telling himself someone else would come, someone else would help. He never went back. Now here she was, chains on her wrists, dust on her feet, the scar he'd wrapped still carved into her skin like a brand. And no one wanted her. The auctioneer raised his gavel, going once. "I'll take her." Gideon's voice cut through the barn like a rifle shot. Every head turned. He stepped forward, boots heavy on the dirt floor, and pulled a billfold from his coat. $10, I'll pay it now. The auctioneer blinked. "You sure, friend? She's been trouble before." "I'm sure." The woman's eyes finally lifted. She stared at him, and for a moment, Gideon thought he saw recognition flicker there. But then it was gone, replaced by something harder, something that looked like resignation. Or maybe hate. The auctioneer shrugged and took the money. Sold, she's yours, don't come crying if she don't work out. Gideon walked to the platform. The woman didn't move, didn't speak, just watched him with those dark, unreadable eyes as he reached for the rope binding her wrists. You don't gotta do that, the auctioneer said. She'll follow. Gideon ignored him. He pulled a knife from his belt and cut the rope. In one clean motion. Then he knelt and cut the chain at her ankles. She stumbled back, catching herself against the post. Her wrists were raw beneath the frayed rope, red and blistered. Can you walk? Gideon asked quietly. She didn't answer, just stared at him like he was a wolf pretending to be a dog. Come on, he said, voice low. Let's get out of here. He turned and started toward the barn door. Behind him, he heard the shuffle of bare feet on dirt. She followed. Outside, the sun was high and merciless. Gideon's horse stood tied to a post, flicking its tail at flies. He untied the reins and glanced back. The woman stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around herself, eyes darting toward the road like she was calculating her chances. I ain't gonna hurt you, Gideon said. She didn't respond. He sighed and swung into the saddle, then offered his hand. It's a long walk to my place. You can ride or you can follow on foot, your choice. For a long moment, she just stared at his hand. Then slowly, she reached up and took it. Her grip was weak, her palm rough with old calluses. Gideon pulled her up behind him, and she settled onto the horse's back, stiff and silent. Hold on, he said. She didn't, but she didn't fall either. Gideon kicked the horse into a trot, and they left the barn behind. As they rode, he felt her breathing against his back, shallow and quick, like a rabbit caught in a snare. He didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't apologize. Not yet. Because he knew the truth now. This wasn't mercy. This was repayment for a debt 8 years overdue. And he had no idea if she'd ever forgive him for being too late. Gideon's ranch sat in a shallow valley tucked between 2 ridges of scrub pine and red rock. It wasn't much, a small cabin, a barn that leaned slightly to the left, a corral with 3 horses and a mule, but it was quiet, private, no neighbors for miles. He reined the horse to a stop near the porch and dismounted. The woman slid off without waiting for help, landing hard on her bare feet. She stood there, arms still wrapped around herself, eyes scanning the property like she was looking for exits. There's a well around back, Gideon said, nodding toward the side of the cabin. Water's cold but clean, you can wash up if you want. She didn't move. He pulled the saddle off his horse and set it on the porch rail. I'll get you some clothes, boots too, if I can find a pair that fit. Still nothing. Gideon turned to face her. You got a name. Her jaw tightened. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, Lena. The name hit him like a gut punch. Lena. He'd asked her the same question 8 years ago, kneeling in the dirt beside a burning farmhouse. She hadn't answered then, either. Lena, he repeated softly, I'm Gideon, Gideon Cole. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but she didn't speak. He took a breath. You probably don't remember me, it was a long time ago, but I remember. Her voice was flat, cold. Gideon froze. Lena's gaze locked onto his, and there was no warmth in it, no relief, just a hard, burning anger that made his throat go dry. I remember, she said again. You wrapped my head, gave me water, then you rode off and left me there. Gideon's hands curled into fists at his sides. I had orders, I was. Everyone has orders. Her voice didn't rise, but it cut deeper than shouting ever could. Everyone has reasons. You think you're the first person to tell me they didn't have a choice. He wanted to explain, wanted to tell her about the war, the messages he'd been carrying, the consequences of disobeying a direct command. but the words felt hollow before they even left his mouth. Because she was right. He had left her, and she'd ended up here. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Lena laughed, a short, bitter sound. Everybody says that after. She turned and walked toward the well, moving stiffly, like every step hurt. Gideon watched her go, chest tight, throat raw. He'd spent 8 years trying not to think about that day, trying to convince himself that someone else had come, that she'd been taken in by family or neighbors or anyone. But deep down, he'd always known. No one had come. And now she was here, bought for $10 at an illegal auction 4 years after the war had supposedly ended slavery, bought by the same man who'd left her behind once before. Gideon exhaled slowly and headed inside. The cabin was small but tidy, one room with a stone fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. Gideon pulled a trunk from under the bed and rummaged through it until he found an old shirt and a pair of trousers. They'd be too big, but they were clean. He also found a pair of boots, worn but sturdy, and a wool blanket. When he stepped back outside, Lena was sitting on the edge of the well, drying her face with the hem of her dress. Her hair was wet and slicked back, and the bruise on her cheekbones stood out sharper now. Gideon set the clothes and boo. "T.S. on the porch, these are for you, take your time." She glanced at the pile, then back at him. Why? Why what? Why did you buy me? Gideon hesitated, because no one else would. That's not an answer. He met her gaze, because I owed you. Lena's expression didn't change. You think $10 makes us even? No, Gideon's voice was quiet but steady. No, I don't. She stood and walked to the porch, picking up the shirt and trousers. What happens now? Now, Gideon shrugged. You stay here, eat, rest, heal. When you're ready, you can leave or stay, your choice. Lena's eyes narrowed. You didn't buy me to own me. No. Then what's the catch? There isn't one. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for the lie. When she didn't find it, her expression shifted, not to trust, but to confusion. People don't do that, she said quietly. Maybe they should. Lena looked away, gripping the clothes tightly. I don't believe you. You don't have to. Gideon stepped off the porch and headed toward the barn. But you're safe here, that much I can promise. That night Gideon slept in the barn. He gave Lena the cabin, the bed, the fireplace. She didn't thank him, didn't say a word when he left a plate of bread and dried meat on the table. But when he checked the next morning, the plate was empty. And the boots were gone from the porch. She was still there. For now. Gideon sat on a hay bale, staring at the dark ceiling, and wondered how long it would take before she ran. Or before someone came looking. Because men like the auctioneer didn't forget, and towns like the one he'd ridden through didn't forgive. Word would spread, questions would be asked. And sooner or later, someone would come knocking. Gideon just hoped he'd have enough time to make things right before that day came. 3 days passed in silence. Lena stayed in the cabin. Gideon worked the ranch, mending fence posts, feeding the horses, hauling water from the creek. He didn't push her to talk, didn't ask questions, just left food on the porch twice a day and gave her space. On the morning of the 4th day, he saw her standing in the doorway, watching him work. She didn't say anything, but she didn't go back inside either. Progress. That afternoon, Gideon was splitting firewood when he heard hoofbeats. He set the axe down and turned toward the ridge. 4 riders crested the hill, moving slow and deliberate. Sunlight glinted off metal, badges pinned to their chests. Gideon's stomach dropped. He wiped his hands on his trousers and walked toward the cabin. Lena was still in the doorway, her face pale. Get inside, he said quietly. Who are they? Law or something close to it? Her eyes widened. They're here for me. Maybe, maybe not. Gideon met her gaze. Either way, stay inside. Don't come out unless I call for you. Lena hesitated, then stepped back and shut the door. Gideon turned and walked to the center of the yard, hands loose at his sides. The riders reined their horses to a stop 15 feet away. The man in front was tall and lean, with a thick mustache and cold blue eyes. He wore a sheriff's badge, but his coat was dusty and worn, and his boots looked like they'd walked through more blood than mud. "Afternoon," the sheriff said, voice flat. "Afternoon," Gideon replied. "You Gideon Cole?" "I am." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Name's Dalton, sheriff out of Red Bluff. Got word you were at an auction a few days back. That true?" Gideon didn't blink. "It is." "Bought yourself a girl?" "I bought a woman, her freedom." Dalton's mouth twitched. "That a fact?" "It is." One of the other riders, a younger man with a patchy beard, leaned forward in his saddle. "She inside?" Gideon didn't answer. Dalton raised a hand, and the young man settled back. "Here's the thing, Cole. That auction you attended, turns out it wasn't exactly legal. We've been tracking the operation for months. Man running it skipped town, but we're rounding up the merchandise, making sure everything's accounted for." "She's not merchandise." "Law says otherwise." Dalton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "See, without proper papers, she's considered stolen property, and stolen property needs to be returned." "Returned to who?" "To the state for processing." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Processing." "That's right. And where does she end up after that?" Dalton shrugged. "Work camp most likely, maybe a farm if she's lucky. Either way, it ain't your concern." "It is now." The sheriff's expression hardened. "You obstructing justice, Cole." "I'm protecting someone who doesn't deserve what you're planning." Dalton leaned back in his saddle, studying Gideon like a man sizing up a horse. "You know who I am." "I know your name." "Then you know I was a Union officer during the war, did my part to end slavery, fought for what was right." He paused. "But the law's the law, and right now the law says that woman belongs to the state." Gideon took a step forward. "Even F. Our years after the war ended, men like you are still finding ways to put chains on people. You call it processing, you call it justice, but it's the same damn thing." Dalton's hand drifted toward his gun. "Careful," Gideon said quietly. The four riders tensed. The young one's hand was already on his pistol. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Dalton smiled, thin and dangerous. "You got sand, Cole, I'll give you that, but sand don't stop bullets." "Maybe not," Gideon's voice was steady, "but I'm not the only one watching." Dalton frowned. "What?" Gideon nodded toward the ridge behind them. The sheriff turned in his saddle. 3 men sat on horseback at the top of the hill. Older men, weathered and sun-scorched, rifles resting across their laps. Ranch hands from neighboring spreads, men Gideon had worked beside for years. One of them raised a hand in greeting. Dalton's jaw clenched. "Friends of yours." "Neighbors," Gideon said. "Good people, the kind who don't take kindly to men with badges abusing their power." The young rider shifted nervously. "Sheriff, maybe we should." "Shut up," Dalton snapped. He stared at Gideon for a long moment, eyes cold and calculating. Then he straightened in his saddle and tugged his reins. "This ain't over, Cole." "I expect not." Dalton kicked his horse and turned away, the other 3 riders following. They rode back over the ridge and disappeared into the hills. Gideon stood there, watching until the dust settled. Then he turned and walked to the cabin. Lena was standing just inside the door, pale and trembling. "They'll come back," she whispered. "I know. You should have let them take me." Gideon shook his head. "No." "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why are you doing this?" He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the girl from 8 years ago, sitting in the ashes of her life, waiting for someone to care. "Because I didn't the first time," he said quietly, and I won't make that mistake again." Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. Gideon stepped back onto the porch and watched the horizon. The sun was sinking, shadows stretched long across the valley. And somewhere out there, Sheriff Dalton was planning his next move. "So let me ask you this. If you were Gideon, would you have stood your ground, or would you have let the law take her?" Take a breath, think about that. And if you're still with me, tap subscribe so you don't miss how this turns out. The next morning, Gideon found Lena sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunrise. She didn't turn when he stepped outside, but she didn't leave either. He sat down beside her, not too close, and rested his elbows on his knees. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Lena said, "Why did you leave me?" Gideon exhaled slowly. "I was a dispatch rider, 22 years old, scared out of my mind half the time. I had orders to deliver a message to a camp 30 miles south. If I didn't show up, men would die." "Men died anyway." "I know." Lena's voice was quiet. "My father tried to stop the soldiers. They shot him in the yard. My mother ran inside to get my little brother. They burned the house with them in it." Gideon closed his eyes. "I stood there and watched," Lena continued. "Watched the smoke, watched the flames, and then you showed up, wrapped my head, gave me water, and rode away." "I'm sorry." "I told you, everyone says that." Gideon turned to look at her. "What do you want me to say, Lena? That I should have stayed? I should have. That I should have taken you with me? I should have. But I didn't, and I've carried that every damn day since." Lena finally met his eyes. "Then why buy me? Why bring me here? Guilt don't fix anything." "I know it doesn't." Gideon's voice was rough. "But maybe I can give you what I didn't before. A choice, a chance." "A chance at what?" "Whatever you want." Lena laughed bitterly. "I don't even know what that means anymore." Gideon stood and walked to the edge of the porch. "Then take your time figuring it out. You're safe here. No one's gonna take you, not while I'm breathing." Lena stared at him, searching his face. "You really mean that?" "I do." She looked away, jaw tight. "I don't know if I can trust you." "I don't expect you to, not yet." Over the next few days, something shifted. Lena started helping with small tasks, mending a torn saddle strap, pulling weeds from the vegetable patch, feeding the chickens. She didn't talk much, but she didn't hide either. One afternoon, Gideon found her standing by the corral, watching the horses. "You ride?" he asked. She shook her head. "My father had a plow horse. I used to brush him, that's all." Gideon opened the gate and led one of the horses out, a gentle mare with a graying muzzle. "Her name's Clover. She's old and slow, but she's got a good heart." Lena reached out hesitantly and touched the mare's neck. Clover nickered softly and leaned into her hand. A small smile flickered across Lena's face, just for a moment, but Gideon. "Zorid, you can ride her if you want," he said, "anytime." Lena nodded, still stroking the horse's neck. That night she sat at the table while Gideon cooked a simple meal, beans, cornbread, coffee. She didn't eat much, but she stayed. "Tell me about them," Gideon said quietly. Lena looked up. "Who?" "Your family." Her expression shuddered. "Why?" "Because I should have asked 8 years ago." Lena set her fork down. For a long time she didn't speak. Then, slowly, she began. "My father's name was Eli. He built that house with his own hands. Took him 3 years. My mother's name was Clara. She sang while she cooked. My brother Samuel was 6. He liked to catch frogs by the creek." Her voice was flat, like she was reciting facts instead of memories. "The soldiers said my father was a traitor, said he'd been hiding Confederate supplies. It wasn't true. We didn't have anything, but they didn't care." She looked down at her hands. "After you left, I walked to town. Took me 2 days. No one would help. They said I was bad luck, that God had judged my family and I was part of it." Gideon's chest ached. "I worked where I could," Lena continued. "Cleaning, mending, cooking, but people didn't want me around long. I reminded them of things they didn't want to remember, so I kept moving, kept working, until one day someone sold me, and then someone else, and then someone else. She met Gideon's eyes. You asked why I don't trust you. That's why, because every person who ever said they'd help me ended up walking away. Gideon set his cup down. I'm not walking away. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Lena's eyes glistened, but she blinked the tears back. Why does it matter so much to you? Because you mattered 8 years ago, and I ignored it. Gideon's voice was steady. I won't ignore it again. For the first time since she'd arrived, Lena didn't look away. And in the silence between them, something fragile began to take root. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. That night, Gideon built 2 small wooden crosses and planted them near the fence line. He carved 3 names into the wood by hand: Eli, Clara, Samuel. When Lena saw them the next morning, she stood there for a long time, arms wrapped around herself. Then she knelt in the dirt and pressed her palm to the wood. Gideon watched from the porch, throat tight. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Sheriff Dalton came back 6 days later. This time, he brought 12 men. Gideon was in the barn when he heard the horses. He stepped into the yard and saw them spread out in a loose line, rifles drawn, faces hard. Dalton sat in the center, calm and cold. Told you it wasn't over, he called out. Gideon didn't move. I heard you. We are taking her, Cole. You can hand her over, or we can go through you. Either way, she's coming with us. Gideon's hand drifted toward his gun. Don't, Dalton's voice was flat. You draw on me, and my men will cut you down before you clear leather. You know that. Gideon did know that. But he also knew he wasn't going to let them take her. She's not property, Gideon said. She's a person, and she's staying here. Dalton sighed. You're a damn fool, Cole. Maybe. The sheriff raised his hand, ready to give the order. Then a voice cut through the air. Dalton. Everyone turned. An older man rode into the yard, gray-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn leather vest. Behind him rode 6 more men, all of them weathered ranch hands with rifles across their saddles. Gideon recognized him immediately. Thomas Henley owned a spread 10 miles east. Good man, fair man. Dalton's jaw tightened. This ain't your business, Henley. It is now. Henley reined his horse to a stop beside Gideon. Cole here worked my land for 5 years, helped me through 2 bad winters, never asked for more than fair pay. If he says that woman deserves protection, I believe him. Law says a lot of things. Henley's voice was calm but firm. But I branded calves with you 20 years ago, Dalton, back before you wore that badge, back when you still remembered what it meant to do right by people. Dalton's expression darkened. You threatening me? No, I'm reminding you. Henley gestured to the men behind him. We're not here to fight. We are here to stand witness. If you want to take that woman, you'll have to explain to a lot of folks why you're treating her like stolen livestock 4 years after the war ended. Dalton's men shifted uneasily in their saddles. The sheriff stared at Henley, then at Gideon, then at the growing number of riders appearing on the ridges around the valley. Word had spread, and the community had decided. Dalton's hand tightened on his reins. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he spat into the dirt and turned his horse. This ain't over, he muttered. Yes, it is, Henley said quietly. Dalton rode away, his men following. They disappeared over the ridge, and the valley fell silent. Gideon led slowly, hands shaking. Henley dismounted and clapped him on the shoulder. You all right? Yeah, thanks. Don't thank me, thank the folks who showed up. Henley glanced toward the cabin. She in there. Gideon nodded. Tell her she's got friends now, whether she knows it or not. Henley mounted up and rode off, the other men following. Gideon stood in the yard, watching them go, heart still pounding. Then he turned and saw Lena standing in the doorway. Her face was wet with tears. "They came for you," she whispered. "They did. Why?" Gideon walked to the porch, because some things are worth standing for. Lena's voice broke. "I don't understand." "You don't have to." Gideon's voice was gentle. "Just know that you're not alone anymore." Lena covered her face with her hands and sobbed, deep, shaking sobs that came from somewhere buried and dark. Gideon stood there, unsure what to do. Then slowly, he stepped forward and rested a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. Days turned into weeks. Lena stayed. She planted seeds in the vegetable patch, mended clothes, rode clover along the creek. Slowly, the bruises faded. Slowly, the fear in her eyes softened. She didn't forgive Gideon, not fully, not yet. But she stopped looking at him like he was going to leave. One evening, they sat on the porch together, watching the sun sink behind the hills. "I think I want to stay," Lena said quietly. Gideon looked at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "I don't have anywhere else, and I don't think I want anywhere else." Gideon smiled, small but real. "Then stay." Lena looked down at her hands. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not walking away." Gideon's throat tightened. "I'm sorry it took me so long." Lena glanced at him, and for the first time, her expression wasn't guarded. It was soft. "I know," she said. Years later, people would still talk about the day Sheriff Dalton tried to take a woman from Gideon Cole's ranch. They'd talk about the neighbors who rode in, about the quiet rancher who stood his ground, about the woman who stayed and built a life from ashes. Lena never forgot the family she'd lost. She visited the crosses every week, laying wildflowers at their base. But she also planted new roots. She learned to ride, learned to laugh again, learned that trust wasn't something you gave all at once. It was something you built slowly over time. And Gideon learned that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about standing in the present and refusing to run. On quiet evenings, when the wind stirred the tall grass and the sun painted the valley gold, Lena would sit on the porch beside him. And sometimes she'd reach over and take his hand. Not because she'd forgotten, but because she'd chosen to stay anyway. The sun dipped lower, dust rose around their feet, and in the distance, the hills stood silent and steady, witnesses to a second chance neither of them thought they'd get.